An arrogant millionaire orders a 12-year-old street girl to clean his filthy bathroom without realizing who she really is. But when someone investigates his past, a shocking discovery comes to light. A DNA test reveals a secret no one could have predicted, changing everything in an instant. Now faced with the truth, someone will have to explain themselves, and nothing will be the same again. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, tell us which city you're watching us from, and we'll keep going. The morning sun reflected off the huge windows of Bianchi & Co., creating a spectacle of light that mesmerized passers-by on Nova Aurora's main avenue. The restaurant, an imposing 3-story building with an Art Deco facade, was more than just a fine dining establishment. It was a symbol of status, power, and social distinction. Matteo Bianchi, 45, surveyed his empire through the windows of his third-floor office. Impeccably dressed in his tailored Italian suit, he exuded an aura of authority that made his employees instantly straighten up in his presence. His alert, brown eyes examined every detail of the main hall through the special glass that allowed him to see without being seen. The restaurant was practically empty at that hour, just a few tables occupied by executives having a business breakfast. The waiters moved with military precision, the result of the rigorous training that Matteo personally oversaw. Every gesture, every movement was calculated to provide the perfect experience for the diners, who could afford the exorbitant prices on the menu. Lena, his assistant for over a decade, entered the room holding a folder of documents. Her worried expression already indicated that she brought bad news. "Mr. Bianchi, we have a problem with the cleaning company," she announced, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "They've increased the contract price by 40%, and they still refuse to include cleaning the bathrooms in the service." Matteo clenched his fists on the solid mahogany table. This was the third contractor in less than 2 months who had caused problems with the bathrooms. The restaurant had 6 luxurious lavatories decorated with Italian marble and gold metalwork, which had to be kept spotless to maintain the establishment's standard. "How much do they want to include the bathrooms?" he asked, already anticipating the absurd answer. "Another 25% on top of the new price," Lena replied, consulting her notes. "They claim they need specialized employees and specific products to maintain the standard you demand." Matteo stood up abruptly, his reflection distorted in the mirrored windows. "Specialized to clean toilets? That's absurd, Lena. They think they can extort us because they know we need the service." At that moment, Raphael, the maitre d', knocked discreetly on the door. His normally serene face showed concern. "Excuse me, Mr. Bianchi, we have a delicate situation in the dining room." "What now?" Matteo asked, his voice thick with irritation. "Mrs. Muller, that food critic from Sabores and Aromas, just posted an online review about our place. She specifically mentioned the state of the bathrooms." Matteo felt his blood run cold. Margaret Muller was known for her merciless criticism and her influence in the restaurant industry. A bad review from her could cause irreparable damage to the restaurant's reputation. Taking out his tablet, Raphael showed the publication. The words jumped out of the screen like stabs. "Bianchi & Co., once a symbol of excellence and refinement, seems to be neglecting basic aspects of hygiene. The bathrooms, in particular, are in a deplorable state that completely clashes with the apparent luxury of the establishment." The heavy silence that followed was interrupted by a commotion coming from outside the room. Through the glass, Matteo saw his employees looking curiously at the entrance of the restaurant. A small, frail figure was trying to get past the security guard. "What's going on down there?" Matteo asked, his voice tense. Lena walked over to the window. It looks like a girl, sir. Quite young. She's insisting on speaking to the owner." Normally, Matteo would never have welcomed anyone without an appointment, much less a child who clearly did not belong in the refined surroundings of his restaurant. But something about that scene, perhaps the desperation for a solution to her problem, perhaps the determination visible even from a distance on the girl's face, made him make an impulsive decision. "Let her up," he ordered, surprising both Lena and Raphael. Minutes later, Clara walked into his office. Her bare feet contrasted dramatically with the Persian carpet, and her shabby clothes seemed even shabbier amid the luxury of the office. but her eyes shone with a determination that Matteo rarely saw, even in his most ambitious executives. "Sir," she began, her voice surprisingly steady for someone so young, "I have come to offer my services. I heard your employees talking about the problem with the bathrooms." Matteo leaned forward in his chair, puzzled. "And what could a girl like you do about it?" "I can keep them clean and tidy, sir. Better than any company. I only ask one thing in return: 1 meal a day." The proposal was absurd, of course. Hiring a child. It was against every rule, every law. But before he could dismiss her, Clara continued, "I know you must think I'm too young, but I've been cleaning houses for several people in my neighborhood. I can prove myself. Give me a week's trial. If you're not satisfied, you'll never see me again." There was something about that girl, a mixture of desperation and dignity, that touched something deep within Matteo, something he thought he had, buried long ago, along with his own childhood memories. "1 week," he heard himself say to the surprise of everyone in the room, himself included. "You have 1 week to prove yourself." The smile that lit up Clara's face at that moment was like a ray of sunshine piercing through the heavy clouds of a stormy day. She gave a small, awkward bow and hurriedly left the room, leaving behind a thoughtful Matteo Bianchi and a gaping Lina. What none of them could have imagined at that moment was that that simple decision, taken in a moment of desperation and intuition, would be the catalyst for a series of events that would forever change not only their lives, but the entire balance of power in New Aurora. The next morning, Clara arrived at Bianchi & Co. before the sun had even risen. She was wearing the same simple clothes as the day before, but there was something different about her posture, a mixture of pride and determination that made her seem taller than she actually was. The restaurant was still closed, with only a few kitchen staff arriving to begin the day's preparations. Jorge, the head of night security, recognized the girl from the previous day's commotion and, following Matteo's specific instructions, allowed her entry. "The cleaning supplies are in the basement closet," Jorge explained, guiding her through the still dark hall. "Mr. Bianchi left instructions so that you will have access to everything you need." Clara nodded, taking in every detail of the room. The luxurious dining room, with its Egyptian linen tablecloths and crystal glasses, looked like something out of a fairy tale. But she wasn't here to dream. She was here to work. As Clara organized her materials, she didn't realize she was being watched. Across the street, in a newly opened cafe, Eric Valmont was having his morning coffee, as he had done every morning for years. His personal driver, Luca, was parked nearby, waiting to take him to his first meeting of the day. Eric was known in Nova Aurora not only for his considerable wealth, but also for his tragic story. 10 years ago, he had it all: a loving wife, a young daughter, and a budding business empire. Then, in a single night, a fire at São Tomé Hospital changed everything. His wife, who was hospitalized for a routine procedure, did not survive. His daughter Alice, who was in the hospital nursery, was also reported lost in the chaos. Since then, Eric has immersed himself in his work, turning his pain into an empire. His investments have multiplied, his power has grown, but the emptiness in his heart has remained unchanged. Until that morning. Through the window of Bianchi & Co., he saw Clara moving about, and something about her made him choke on his coffee. The way she tilted her head in concentration, the little frown on her forehead when something didn't go as planned, they were identical to those of his late wife, Julia. "Impossible," he muttered to himself, his hands shaking slightly as he placed the cup on the table. Inside the restaurant, Clara worked with surprising efficiency for someone so young. Her movements were precise, methodical. She didn't just clean, she transformed. Within hours, the bathrooms at Bianchi & Co. gleamed like never before, every surface reflecting the light like freshly polished mirrors. When Matteo arrived, at 8 a.m. sharp as usual, he was immediately intercepted by Lina. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, leading him to the bathrooms. Matteo walked into the first bathroom and was momentarily speechless. The room wasn't just clean, it was spotless. The marble gleamed, the gold faucets gleamed, and a soft scent of lavender hung in the air. How did she? He began to ask, but was interrupted by Clara herself, who came in carrying her cleaning products. "Good morning, Mr. Bianchi," she said, with a dignity that seemed out of place in someone so young. "I hope you are satisfied. I still intend to improve some details tomorrow." Matteo watched her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Where did you learn to do that, Clara?" For a moment, a shadow passed over the girl's face. "Necessity teaches a lot, sir. When you have to survive, you learn a little of everything." Across the street, Eric continued his observation, now completely forgetting his commitments for the day. Something about that girl intrigued him deeply, awakening memories and feelings that had long been dormant. "Luca," his driver called over the intercom, "cancel my morning appointments and find out everything you can about a new employee at Bianchi & Co., a girl, maybe 12. Meanwhile, the restaurant was beginning to come to life. The first breakfast customers were arriving, and the characteristic buzz filled the atmosphere. Clara, her work finished, discreetly headed to the kitchen to receive her promised meal. Chef. Giuseppe, a burly Italian known for his fiery temperament, watched curiously as Clara asked to wrap up her meal rather than eat it there. "Piccola, food is better when it's hot," he argued, genuinely concerned. Clara smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Thank you, chef, but I need to take it home. I have people waiting for me." Giuseppe exchanged a meaningful look with Lena, who was watching the scene. There was much more to that girl than met the eye. The day went by as usual at Bianchi & Co., but something had changed. Staff were talking about the remodeled bathrooms, customers were offering spontaneous compliments, and even Margaret Mueller, the infamous food critic, made sure to update her online review, noting the marked improvement in the facilities. But the real changes were just beginning. As Clara left the restaurant at the end of the day, carefully carrying her precious wrapped meal, two powerful forces had begun to move behind the scenes in New Aurora. Eric Valmont, in his office on the top floor of the Millennium Building, was examining the first reports about Clara that were beginning to arrive. And Matteo Bianchi, for the first time in years, found himself thinking not about profits or losses, but about the story behind this mysterious girl who had transformed not only his bathrooms, but also something inside himself. The sun was setting on New Aurora when Eric Valmont received the first detailed report on Clara. Sitting in his panoramic office in the Millennium Building, he scrutinized every word with obsessive attention. The coincidences were too disturbing to ignore. "Estimated date of birth March 15, 2013, he murmured, feeling his heart race. That was the exact day Alice had been born. Hospital Saint-Thomé, the same hospital where the fire had broken out. His hands shook as he turned the page. At Bianchi & Co., Clara was finishing another day of work. After 2 weeks, she had already established a precise routine. She would arrive before dawn, carry out her tasks with meticulous dedication, and, at the end of the day, leave with her carefully wrapped meal. On that particular afternoon, however, something different happened. While putting away her cleaning supplies, Clara was surprised by the presence of Sophia, the restaurant's sommelier, an elegant woman in her 40s who always treated her with special kindness. "Clara," Sophia called, her soft voice echoing in the empty room. "Do you have a moment?" The girl nodded, nervously adjusting her simple clothes. "You know I've been watching you," Sophia continued, sitting down at one of the empty tables and indicating the chair across from her. "You never eat here. You always take your food away. Why?" Clara hesitated, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I have responsibilities at home," she finally replied. "People who depend on me." Sophia leaned forward, her green eyes shining with understanding. "Your family?" "More or less," Clara replied vaguely. "Marina, the lady who raised me, she takes care of 5 other children besides me, all rescued from the streets. We don't have much, but we share what we have." The revelation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Sophia felt her heart tighten. She herself had a story of overcoming, having grown up in an orphanage before being adopted by a wealthy family. As this conversation unfolded, Matteo watched the scene unfold from his office on the third floor. Something about the interaction between Sofia and Clara intrigued him. There was a genuineness there that he rarely saw in his world of business and appearances. On the other side of town, Eric continued his investigation. The report mentioned that Clara lived with Marina Martins, a former nurse at São Tomé Hospital. The same hospital, the same night. There were too many coincidences. Luca, his assistant, called over the intercom, "Get the car ready, we need to make a visit." Back at the restaurant, Sofia had a proposal for Clara. "What do you think about learning to read the menu in French? I can teach you during your breaks at work. You're smart, you learn quickly." Clara's eyes shone with a new intensity. "Would you do that for me?" "Why not? You can never have too much knowledge," Sofia smiled, remembering her own journey. Outside. The restaurant, a distinct figure, watched the scene through the windows. Eric had decided to make a stop before his visit to Marina. Something about the way Clara smiled, the way her eyes lit up, made his heart ache with memories of Julia. At that moment, Matteo decided to go down to the hall. He approached the table where Clara and Sofia were talking, surprising them both. "I heard your proposal, Sofia," he said, his voice softer than usual. "It's an excellent idea. In fact, why don't we expand on this? Clara could learn more about how the restaurant works as a whole." Clara blinked, astonished. "But I'm just the cleaning lady, sir." "You're so much more than that, Clara," Matteo replied, surprising even himself with the sincerity in his voice. "You brought something different to this place, something that is priceless." Outside, Eric watched the scene with a lump in his throat. There was something all too familiar about the way Clara tilted her head slightly as she smiled, just like Julia did. The sun had already completely set when Clara finally left the restaurant that night. In her hands, in addition to the day's meal, was a small notebook that Sofia had given her for French lessons. Her steps were light, almost dancing, as she crossed the streets towards her modest home. She didn't notice the luxurious car following her at a distance, nor the man with a tormented expression who watched her through the tinted windows. Eric had decided to postpone his visit to Marina. First, he wanted to better understand this girl who had awakened so many dormant memories. What none of them knew was that that night would mark the beginning of a series of revelations that would forever change the fate of everyone involved. The shadows of the past began to move, bringing to light secrets long buried deep in the history of New Aurora. The next morning dawned with a light drizzle over Nova Aurora. Marina Martins watched from the window of her simple home as she prepared breakfast for her children. The small stove worked to heat enough water for everyone, while she carefully divided the previous day's bread. Her thoughts had been restless ever since Clara had told her about her new job at Bianchi & Co. The name of the restaurant was familiar, but that wasn't what worried her. It was the constant fear that the past would somehow catch up with them. "Aunt Marina," called Leo, the youngest of her protégés, "Clara has already gone to work?" "Yes, dear," she replied, stroking the boy's hair. "She always leaves before the sun rises." At Bianchi & Cambers, Clara was already fully active. In addition to her usual tasks, she now carried with her the notebook that Sofia had given her, studying French words during her breaks. "Bonjour, petit papillon," Sofia greeted her, meeting her in the hallway. "Do you remember what it means?" "Good morning, little butterfly," Clara replied proudly. Her face lit up with Sofia's approving smile. From his usual observation post, Matteo watched the interaction with growing interest. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere of the restaurant. The staff seemed happier, more united, and it had all started with Clara's arrival. "Mr. Bianchi," Lena interrupted his thoughts, entering the room with a worried expression. "Eric Valmont is here. He wants to talk to you about Clara." The name made Matteo sit up straighter in his chair. Eric was not only one of the most powerful men in the city, he was known for his obsession with the past, especially after the tragedy he had experienced. "Send him in," Matteo replied, instinctively adjusting his tie. Eric walked in with his usual imposing presence, but there was something different in his eyes, a mix of anxiety and hope that Matteo had never seen before. "We need to talk about your young employee," Eric began bluntly. How long has she worked here? A few weeks, Matteo replied cautiously. Why? Do you know anything about her past? Her family, where she was born? Matteo frowned. Eric, what's going on? The businessman took a deep breath, pulling a folder of documents from his briefcase. Look at this, he said, spreading papers across the table. Records from the São Tomé hospital. On the night of the fire, there was a huge mess. Babies were rushed, documents were lost. And what does this have to do with Clara? She was born on the same day as my Alice, Matteo, in the same hospital. And what's more, the woman who raised her, Marina Martins, was a nurse there at the time. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Matteo examined the documents, feeling the weight of the revelation that was unfolding. Downstairs, oblivious to the conversation that could change her life, Clara helped Sophia organize the crystal glasses for the lunch service. You know, Clara, Sophia said, noting the girl's dedication, you remind me a lot of myself when I was your age, always wanting to learn, always striving to do more. Clara smiled, but her eyes held a shadow of worry. Sometimes I'm afraid, Donna Sophia, afraid that all this is too good to be true. Sophia put her hand on the girl's shoulder. Life sometimes surprises us, little one, not always for the worse. In Matteo's office, the conversation continued. What do you intend to do, Eric? I asked Matteo after hearing the businessman's entire theory. I need to be sure, Eric replied, his voice shaking slightly. But if it's true, if Clara really is Alice, and if it isn't, Matteo interrupted, have you thought about the impact this might have on her life? On the lives of the family that raised her? Eric ran a hand through his grey hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. You don't understand, Matteo. All these years, I've lived with emptiness. If there's even the slightest possibility... At that moment, a sound of laughter caught both of their attention. Through the glass, they could see Clara and Sophia practicing their French pronunciations, the girl laughing at her own mistakes, while the sommelier patiently corrected her. She's happy here, Matteo said softly. She has a family who loves her, even if they don't have much. Sometimes, Eric, true love isn't in the blood. The words hit Eric like a punch to the gut. He watched Clara once more, noticing every little gesture that reminded him of Julia, every smile that made his heart clench. Maybe you're right, he finally admitted. But I can't just ignore this. I need to at least talk to Marina, understand what happened that night. While the two men discussed Clara's fate, the girl went about her day, unaware of the forces moving around her. Fate, however, had its own plans, and the invisible bonds that connected all those lives began to tighten, preparing for a revelation that no one could have foreseen. The rain was falling harder when Marina received the call she had been dreading. On the other end of the line, a man's deep voice identified himself as Eric Valmont's lawyer. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard the name. Mrs. Martins, said the lawyer, Mr. Valmont would like to arrange a meeting with you. It's about Clara. Marina sat down heavily in her worn chair, her hands shaking. After all these years, she muttered to herself. In her mind, the memories of that chaotic night at São Tomé Hospital came flooding back. At Bianchi & Co., Clara was having her first formal lesson with Sophia. The sommelier had prepared a small tasting of juices in crystal glasses, teaching the girl about presentation and service. See, Clara, Sophia explained, each drink has its own glass, its own way of being served. It's like a dance, you know? Clara watched in fascination as Sophia demonstrated the precise movements, the natural elegance with which she handled the glasses. It's like magic, the girl whispered. Matteo, who was passing by the room at the time, stopped to watch the scene. There was something special happening here. Not just a lesson, but a transformation. Clara absorbed each new piece of knowledge like a sponge, her eyes shining with an intelligence that was far beyond her years. Mr. Bianchi, Lena called, approaching discreetly. Mr. Valmont has just confirmed that Marina Martins has agreed to meet him. It will be tonight. Matteo nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. And Clara? She doesn't know anything yet, Lena replied. watching the girl who was now trying to imitate Sophia's elegant gestures. Across town, Eric prepared for the meeting that could change everything. In his office, he once again examined old photos of Julia and Alice. The resemblance between his late daughter and Clara was too striking to ignore. "Luca," he called to his driver, "get the car ready for tonight, and take that box I set aside too." The box in question contained documents, photos, and a small charred teddy bear, the only memento recovered from the fire. That afternoon, something unexpected happened at the restaurant. Margaret Mueller, the feared food critic, returned for another review. This time, however, her attention was not just on the food or the spotless bathrooms. "Who's that girl?" Matteo asked, pointing to Clara, who was discreetly arranging the flowers on the table arrangements. "A very special employee," Matteo replied, with a pride that surprised him. Margaret watched Clara for a few moments. "There's something different about her, a natural elegance. She reminds me of someone, but I can't quite put my finger on who." The critic's words echoed in Matteo's mind. How many more people would notice the similarity that Eric had? At dusk, Clara was preparing to leave, her precious package of food in her hands, when Sophia called her. "I have something for you," the sommelier said, handing her a small package. "It's a uniform. I had it made especially for you." Clara opened the package with reverential care. Inside was a simple but elegant ensemble: black pants, a white shirt, and a small apron with the restaurant's logo. "But why?" asked Clara emotionally. "Because you're part of our team now," Sophia replied, helping her fold her uniform, "and you deserve to feel that way." Meanwhile, Marina was preparing for her meeting with Eric. She put on her best outfit, a simple blue dress she saved for special occasions, and organized her own documents, papers that had yellowed with age, but that told a story that finally needed to be told. Night was falling over Nova Aurora when Eric arrived at Marina's modest residence. The contrast between his luxurious car and the simplicity of the neighborhood could not be greater. Marina waited for him in the small room, her hands clasped tightly together. When their eyes met, decades of secrets seemed to hang heavy in the air between them. "Ms. Martins," Eric began, his voice controlled, "I believe we know why I'm here." Marina nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Valmont. In fact, I've been waiting for this visit for a long time." On the other side of the city, Clara arrived home, unaware that her life was about to change forever. In her arms, in addition to the day's food, she carried her new uniform and her dreams of a better future. What no one knew was that the truth that was about to be revealed was much more complex than anyone could have imagined, and that sometimes fate has surprising ways of correcting the mistakes of the past. The small living room in Marina's house seemed even smaller with the imposing presence of Eric Valmont. The silence between them was thick, laden with decades of unspoken secrets. "Before we begin," Marina said, getting up to retrieve an old shoebox from the closet, "there's something I need to show you." His hands shook slightly as he opened the box. From inside, he removed an envelope yellowed with age. "This is the true story of that night, Mr. Valmont, a story I have carried with me all these years." At Bianchi & Co., the dinner crowd was starting to wind down. Clara, who had stayed late to help Sophia with a special event, was admiring her new uniform, neatly folded on a chair. "You can use it tomorrow," Sophia smiled, watching the girl's dreamy gaze. "Mrs. Sophia," Clara hesitated for a moment, "do you think that one day I could be like you? Really work here, not just cleaning?" The sommelier sat down next to her. "Clara, you are already much more than you imagine. I see a special light in you, something rare." At Marina's house, Eric opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, he found a set of documents from the São Tomé hospital and some old photographs. "I was head nurse on the children's ward that night," Marina began, her voice low but firm. "When the fire started, chaos ensued. Children crying, parents in despair, smoke everywhere." Eric felt his heart tighten. Those memories still haunted him in nightmares. His wife Julia, she was hospitalized on the 3rd floor, Marina continued. When the flames began to spread, she managed to get to the nursery. She was looking for Alice. The revelation hit Eric like a bolt of lightning. In all these years, he had never known that Julia had come so close to saving their daughter. "What happened next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marina closed her eyes, reliving that terrible night. Julia found not only Alice, but also another baby, Clara, both born on the same day, almost at the same time. She tried to save them both. In the restaurant, Matteo watched Clara through the windows of his office. The girl was helping to arrange the last few tables, moving with a natural grace that seemed all too familiar. Her phone buzzed. A message from Eric. "The truth is more extraordinary than we imagined. We need to talk." Back at Marina's house, the story continued to unfold. "Julia was able to hand both babies over to me," Marina explained, silent tears streaming down her face. Her last words were, protect them both." Eric felt the world spin around him. "Two? Are you saying—" "Yes, Mr. Valmont. Clara and Alice were twins, separated at birth due to an administrative error at the hospital. Julia discovered this that night through the documents she found in the nursery." The silence that followed was deafening. Eric stared at an old photograph showing two identical babies lying side by side in the hospital nursery. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. Marina wiped away her tears. The chaos of that night. So many records were lost. When it was all over, one of the girls had been put up for adoption in another state. Clara stayed with me, but there was no way to prove she was your daughter. And then you were so devastated by the loss of Julia. At Bianchi & Co., Clara said goodbye to Sophia without imagining that her life was about to change completely. Her heart was light, full of dreams about her future at the restaurant. "See you tomorrow, little butterfly," Sophia said goodbye, using the French nickname she had given her. Clara smiled, hugging her new uniform to her chest. "Bonjour, petit papillon," she replied, proud of her pronunciation. As he walked home, the full moon lit his way. In the sky, the stars seemed to twinkle more brightly, as if they knew that that night marked the beginning of a new story. In his living room, Eric held the photograph of the two babies, his world turning upside down. Not only had he found Clara, but he had discovered that Alice was alive. Somewhere, too. "There's one more thing you need to know," Marina said softly. "About Alice, I found out where she is." The next morning dawned with a different sense of expectation in the air. Clara arrived at Bianchi & Co., wearing her new uniform, the fabric still smelling new, hugging her small body with dignity. As she walked through the restaurant doors, she noticed something different. The employees were looking at her strangely, some even whispering among themselves. Sophia greeted her with a warm smile, but there was a subtle tension in her eyes that Clara couldn't help but notice. "You look beautiful in your uniform, little papillon. Today we will begin your official training in the ballroom." In Matteo's office, a tense meeting was unfolding. Eric was there, as was Lena and a man Clara didn't know, Dr. Teo Rossi, a DNA testing expert. "We need to be absolutely sure before we make any moves," Matteo argued, his voice more serious than usual. "We can't just come in and turn her life upside down." Eric nodded, his eyes fixed on the photograph Marina had given him the night before. "The amazing thing is that Alice, she's closer than we thought." In the dining room, Clara began her training with Sophia. The sommelier explained the different types of glasses, the service etiquette, and the names of the dishes in French. The girl absorbed every word with a thirst for knowledge that impressed everyone. "Mademoiselle," a customer called, testing the new waitress. Clara approached with the posture Sophia had taught her. "Oui, monsieur," she replied, pronouncing perfectly the words she had practiced. The customer smiled, impressed. "You remind me of someone. Don't you go to St. Clair College?" Clara shook her head, confused. "No, sir. I study at the public school in the Esperanza neighborhood." The man frowned, still intrigued. "Curious. You look identical to a student there. Same age, same features." In the office, The conversation continued. Dr. Rossi explained the procedures necessary for the DNA test, while Eric revealed what Marina had told him about Alice. "She's at St. Clair's College," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "She was adopted by the Rothschild family, Sophia Rothschild." Matteo almost dropped his coffee cup. "Sophia? Our Sophia?" "Yes," Eric confirmed. "The sommelier at your restaurant. She's Alice's adopted sister." In the hall, Clara continued her training, oblivious to the revelations happening a few floors above. Sophia watched her with a different eye now, noticing for the first time the striking similarities to her younger sister. "Clara," Sophia called, her voice soft. "Do you have any pictures of yourself as a baby?" The girl shook her head. "No, Donna Sophia. Aunt Marina says we lost everything in a fire when I was very little." Sophia felt her heart sink. Her sister Alice had also been rescued from a fire. It was a story her adoptive parents told with sadness, how they had found the baby in a shelter after the tragedy at Saint-Thomé Hospital. In the office, Dr. Rossi was finalizing his preparations. "We can do the test today, but we need Marina's authorization as Clara's legal guardian." "And what will we do with Alice?" Matteo asked, worried about the implications. "Sophia already knows," Eric replied. "I talked to her this morning before Clara arrived. She's in shock, but she understands the situation. Alice is traveling with her adoptive parents. She'll be back in 2 days." In the hall, Clara practiced pouring water into crystal glasses, her reflection multiplied on the shiny surfaces. In each reflection, a part of her story began to reveal itself, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. "Mrs. Sophia," she called, noticing the sommelier lost in thought. "Is everything okay?" Sophia smiled, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, Petit Papillon, sometimes life presents us with wonderful surprises." The day continued, each minute filled with expectations and secrets. Marina was called to the restaurant, and upon arriving she found not only Eric and Matteo, but also a discreet medical team, prepared to carry out the tests that could confirm what everyone already suspected in their hearts. Clara, serving tables, with her natural grace, had no idea that every person in the restaurant was looking at her with new eyes, seeing in her not only the determined girl who had conquered her space, but also the miracle of a destiny that, after so many years, was beginning to correct its path. And somewhere along the way, on a trip with her adoptive parents, Alice Rothschild also didn't know that her life was about to change forever, that the reflection she saw in the mirror every morning had a much deeper explanation than she ever imagined. The next 2 days were an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. At Bianchi & Co., the seemingly normal routine hid a palpable tension. Clara, still unaware of the storm brewing around her, continued her training with enthusiasm, absorbing each new knowledge like a sponge. Matteo watched the girl from his office, his heart divided between admiration for the potential he saw in her and concern about the impact the revelations would have on her life. Lena, always attentive, noticed the change in her boss's behavior. "Mr. Bianchi," she said softly, "perhaps it is time we prepared Clara for what is to come." Matteo sighed deeply. "You're right, Lena. But how do you explain something like that to a child?" On the other side of town, Marina lay awake at night, sifting through old memories and documents. The weight of the secret she had carried for so many years felt even heavier now that the truth was about to come out. She looked at the other children she was raising, wondering how she would explain the situation to them. Eric, meanwhile, was vacillating between the euphoria of having found not just one, but 2 daughters, and the fear of what the future held. He spent hours in his office looking at old photos of Julia, imagining how she would react to all this. "My love," he whispered to the photo of his late wife, "you knew all along, didn't you? You tried to save them both." On the morning of the third day, Bianchi & Co. was in an uproar. Alice Rothschild was due back from her trip that afternoon, and Sophie was visibly nervous. Clara, noticing the unusual agitation, approached her mentor. "Ms. Sophia, is everything okay? You seem worried." Sophia looked at Clara, seeing in her not only the devoted apprentice, but now also the sister of her beloved Alice. I'm fine, Petite. Papillon, just a little anxious. My sister is coming back from her trip today. I didn't know you had a sister, Clara exclaimed, genuinely interested. Is she older? Sophia smiled sadly. Actually, she's exactly your age. At that moment, Matteo came down to the hall accompanied by Eric and Marina. The trio approached Clara and Sophia, their serious faces indicating that something important was about to happen. Clara, Matteo called gently, could you come with us for a moment? There's something important we need to talk about. The girl looked at Sophia in confusion, who nodded encouragingly. Go, dear, it's okay. In Matteo's office, Clara sat, feeling small in front of the adults surrounding her. Marina knelt beside her, holding her hands. My love, she began, her voice shaking slightly. Do you remember the stories I told you about the night I found you? Clara nodded, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Well, Marina continued, there's more to this story than I could tell before, and it involves these people here. Eric stepped closer, his eyes watering. Clara, he said softly, a long time ago I lost my wife, and I thought I lost my daughters in a fire. But now... The next few hours were a roller coaster of emotions. Clara listened, wide-eyed, to the story of her birth, the fire and the separation from her twin sister. Matteo and Sophia filled in the gaps, explaining how coincidences had led them to this discovery. So, Clara finally said, her voice small but firm, I have a sister, and you're my father? Eric nodded, tears streaming freely down his face. Yes, my dear, if you wish. Clara looked at Marina, confused and a little scared. But what about Aunt Marina and my brothers? Marina hugged her tightly. I'll always be your aunt, my love. Nothing will change that. It's just, now you have more family to love. At the airport, Eric's car waited for Alice and her adoptive parents to arrive. Sophia was there, her heart pounding, preparing for the conversation that would change her sister's life forever. When Alice finally appeared in the arrivals hall, Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. The resemblance to Clara was undeniable, even in the smallest gestures. Alice, Sophia called, waving. Alice ran to hug her sister, not knowing that this hug marked the beginning of a new journey. Alice, dear, Sophia said softly, we have a lot to talk about. There is someone very special you need to meet. At Bianchi & Counters, Clara sat between Eric and Marina, still processing everything she had learned. Matteo watched the scene, feeling that his restaurant was once again the stage for an extraordinary story. Clara, Eric said gently, your sister is on her way. Would you like to meet her? Clara nodded, a mix of fear and anticipation in her eyes. She knows about me? She'll find out now, Eric replied. Just like you, she didn't know any of this. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone turn. The office door opened, and there, standing like a mirror of Clara, was Alice. The two girls stared at each other, recognizing in each the reflection they saw every day in the mirror. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with decades of secrets, pain, and now, hope. Two lives, separated by tragic circumstances, were finally reunited, and at Bianchi & Co., a new story began to be written. The silence that hung over Matteo's office was almost palpable. Clara and Alice stared at each other, their identical eyes reflecting a mixture of shock, curiosity, and an instinctive recognition that went beyond words. Alice was the first to break the silence. You're just like me, she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Clara nodded, a small, hesitant smile forming on her lips. And you're just like me, she replied. Eric watched the scene with his heart racing, silent tears streaming down his face. There were his daughters, together for the first time since they were babies. Marina, by his side, held his hand in a gesture of silent support. Sophia stepped forward, placing a hand on each girl's shoulder. Alice, Clara, your sisters, twins. The next few hours were a roller coaster of emotions. Alice listened in amazement to the story of her birth, the fire, and the separation. Clara, for her part, absorbed each new detail, each piece of the puzzle of her life falling into place. "So," Alice finally said, looking at Eric, "you are our biological father?" Eric nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Alice, I thought I lost you both that terrible night." Clara looked at Marina, a shadow of worry in her eyes. "What about Aunt Marina? She's still my family, isn't she?" Marina came closer, hugging Clara tightly. "Always, my love. I will always be your family." Matteo, watching everything from a corner of the room, felt a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. This restaurant, which had always been his pride and focus, suddenly seemed like the perfect setting for something much bigger than business. It was the stage for a family gathering that defied all odds. Alice's adoptive parents, who had been following everything in silence, finally spoke up. Mr. Rothschild, a distinguished middle-aged man, approached Eric. "Mr. Valmont," he began, his voice thick with emotion, We always knew that Alice was adopted, but we never imagined a story like this." Mrs. Rothschild, with tears in her eyes, added, "Alice has always been and will always be our daughter, but we understand the importance of this moment, of this reunion." Eric reached out to the couple. "I can never thank you enough for taking such good care of Alice all these years. I have no intention of separating you." The two girls, who had been watching the adults interact until then, looked at each other again. There were so many questions, so many things to share. Do you like pistachio ice cream?" Alice asked, breaking the ice with the first thing that came to mind. Clara laughed, the sound of her laughter echoing Alice's. "It's my favorite. Aunt Marina always says it's a strange taste for a child." "Mine too," cried Alice, her eyes shining. "Mother and father think so too." That simple exchange seemed to melt the tension in the room. Suddenly they were no longer strangers, but two sisters discovering their similarities. Sophia, seeing the opportunity, suggested, "How about we take the girls out for ice cream? I think we could all use a lighter moment." The idea was met with general enthusiasm. As the group prepared to leave, Matteo took Clara aside. "Clara," he said softly, "I know a lot has changed today, but I want you to know that your place here at the restaurant is guaranteed, if that is still your wish." The girl's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Bianchi. I still really want to learn and work here." As they left Bianchi & Co., Clara and Alice walked side by side, their hands occasionally touching, as if to confirm that the other was real. Eric followed behind them, his heart overflowing with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. At the ice cream shop, the girls discovered more similarities. They both loved reading, had a knack for math, and dreamed of traveling the world. But there were also differences. Clara, raised with fewer resources, had a maturity and a sense of responsibility that surprised Alice. While the twins chatted animatedly, the adults discussed the next steps. There were legal issues to be resolved, arrangements to be made, but above all there was the challenge of integrating two families, two lives that until then had followed completely different paths. "It won't be easy," Marina said, watching the girls, "but looking at them now, I know it's worth every challenge." "That comes." Eric nodded, a new determination in his eyes. "We've wasted so much time, but now we have a chance to make it right." At the end of that extraordinary day, when everyone was saying goodbye, Clara and Alice hugged each other for a long time. They were no longer strangers, but parts of a whole that had finally found each other. "See you tomorrow, sister," Alice whispered. "See you tomorrow," Clara replied, feeling as if a missing piece of her heart had finally been found. As the sun set over New Aurora, casting golden hues over the city, a new story began to be written. A story of family, of redemption, and of a love that overcame all barriers of time and destiny. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for everyone involved. Bianchi & Cosa became more than just a luxury restaurant. It became a meeting place where two lives, once separate, began to intertwine again. Clara continued her training at the restaurant, now with renewed enthusiasm. Her eyes shone with a new light, as if each task she performed connected her more deeply to her family's history. Sophia, watching the girl's dedication, felt a mixture of pride and a pang of melancholy, remembering her own journey. "You know, little Papillon," Sophia said one afternoon as she taught Clara about the different types of wine, "you remind me a lot of myself when I first started. That thirst for learning, that determination." Clara smiled, adjusting the uniform she now wore with pride. "It's hard to believe that all of this is real, Donna Sophia. Sometimes I wake up thinking it was a dream." On the other side of town, Alice was experiencing her own changes. The girl who had always had everything now found herself fascinated by Clara's world. She began to visit the Esperanza neighborhood regularly, meeting Clara's siblings and helping Marina with the household chores. "Alice," called Leo, the youngest of Marina's protégés, "can you teach me to read like Clara does?" Alice felt her heart melt. "Of course, Leo. How about we start now?" Eric watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and guilt. Seeing his daughters together was a dream come true, but each moment also reminded him of lost years. One afternoon, as he watched them play in the garden of his mansion, he approached Marina. "How did you do it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you raise such an amazing girl under such difficult circumstances?" Marina smiled softly. "With love, Mr. Valmont, and with the certainty that every child is a treasure, no matter where they come from." These words touched Eric deeply. In the days that followed, he began to rethink many of his priorities. The man who had previously only cared about business and profits now found himself involved in social projects, looking for ways to help children in vulnerable situations. At Bianchi and Coco, Matteo was also undergoing his own transformations. Clara's presence had changed something fundamental in the restaurant. The staff seemed more united, more committed. Even the customers noticed a different, more welcoming atmosphere. "You know, Lena," Matteo commented one night after work, "I think we found something more valuable than profit here." Lena smiled, understanding perfectly. "Yes, sir, we found family." Meanwhile, Clara and Alice discovered new similarities and differences every day. They shared not only tastes and mannerisms, but also dreams and fears. One evening, sitting on the terrace of the Valmont mansion, the two women talked under the stars. "Alice," Clara began hesitantly, Do you ever feel like something is missing, even though you have everything?" Alice was silent for a moment, thinking. "I've always felt it," she admitted at last, "as if there were an echo inside me, calling out to someone I didn't." "No." The two embraced, silent tears streaming down their identical faces. It was a moment of deep understanding, of healing. At the restaurant, a surprise awaited Clara. Matteo, inspired by the girl's dedication and the transformation she had brought about, decided to create a scholarship program for talented young people from underprivileged communities. Clara would be the first beneficiary. "I want you to have every opportunity, Clara," Matteo explained emotionally. "Your determination deserves to be rewarded and cultivated." Word spread quickly. Soon, Bianchi & Co. was no longer just a symbol of luxury, but a beacon of hope and social transformation. Other entrepreneurs, inspired by the initiative, began to create similar programs. Eric, seeing the positive impact that was being generated, decided to go further. He announced the creation of the Julia Valmont Foundation in honor of his late wife, dedicated to helping orphaned and vulnerable children. "Julia always wanted to make a difference," he said at a news conference with Clara and Alice by his side. "Now, through our daughters, her dream is coming true." As summer drew to a close and a new school year approached, Clara and Alice prepared for yet another big change. They would be attending St. Clair College together. For Clara, it was the fulfillment of a dream that had once seemed impossible. For Alice, it was the chance to see the world through her sister's eyes. The day before, the first day of school, the two were in Alice's room organizing their materials. "I'm nervous," Clara admitted, carefully folding her new uniform. Alice took his hand, smiling. "You don't have to be. We'll be together, remember, always." That night, Nova Aurora seemed to shine with a special light. At Bianchi & Co., Matteo raised a toast with his team, celebrating not only the success of the business, but the extraordinary journey they had witnessed. In his mansion, Eric looked at old photos of Julia, feeling for the first time in years that he was truly honoring her memory. And in Marina's simple home, the laughter of children echoed, a promise of better days to come. Clara and Alice, united by a bond that went beyond blood, fell asleep holding hands, their hearts beating in sync. The future that awaited them was bright, full of promise and possibilities. And it all began with a simple offer to clean bathrooms, proof that sometimes miracles appear in the most unexpected places. The first semester at St. Clair College was a journey of discovery and challenges for Clara and Alice. While Alice was already familiar with the environment, for Clara it was an entirely new world. The imposing hallways, the classrooms equipped with the latest technology, and the vast library were like a dream come true for the girl who had always valued knowledge. However, not everything was perfect. Clara soon noticed that some students looked at her with disdain, whispering about her humble origins. Alice, protective, was always by her side, ready to defend her. "Don't mind them," Alice said, hugging her sister. "They don't know anything about you, about us." Clara smiled gratefully, but the situation made her uncomfortable. Determined to prove her worth, she immersed herself in her studies with an intensity that surprised even the most demanding teachers. Meanwhile, at Bianchi & Co., changes continued. Matteo's scholarship program had expanded, and the restaurant now offered culinary and hospitality courses to young people from underprivileged communities. Sophia, inspired by Clara's determination, had become the program's lead mentor. One afternoon, while supervising a practical class, Sophia was surprised by an unexpected visitor. Margaret Muller, the feared food critic, entered the restaurant after opening hours. "Miss Muller," Sophia greeted, intrigued. "How can I help you?" Margaret surveyed the scene before her. Young apprentices preparing elaborate dishes, their faces intent and proud. "I came to see for myself," she replied. "I've heard about the changes here. It's amazing." Sophia smiled, inviting the critics to a special tasting prepared by the students. As they tasted the dishes, Margaret became visibly emotional. "You know," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I spent years criticizing restaurants, striving for perfection. But this is more than perfection. It's transformation." At the Valmont mansion, Eric faced his own challenges, the Julia. Valmont Foundation was growing rapidly, and with it came responsibilities and difficult decisions. One night, while reviewing some documents, he was interrupted by Clara. "Dad?" she called hesitantly, still getting used to the word. "Can I talk to you?" Eric immediately put the papers aside. "Of course, my dear. What is it?" Clara sat up, fiddling nervously with the hem of her shirt. "It's about school. Some students, they make comments about me, about where I came from." Eric felt a surge of protectiveness and anger. "Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Do you want me to talk to management?" Clara shook her head. "No, it's not that. I want to prove that I can be more than they think. I want to do something important, something that will help other kids like me." Eric felt his heart swell with pride. In that moment, he saw not only his daughter, but Julia's spirit alive within her. "I'm sure we can figure something out together," he said, hugging her. In the weeks that followed, Clara, with Alice's help and Eric's support, developed an ambitious project, a mentoring program where St. Clair students would provide extra classes for children in the Esperanza neighborhood. The project quickly gained momentum. Students who had previously looked down on Clara now sought her out, eager to participate. The school principal, impressed by the initiative, offered her full support. On a sunny afternoon, the first group of St. Clair students arrived at the community center in the Esperanza neighborhood. Among them was Alice, beaming with pride for her sister. Marina, watching the children gather, felt tears of joy. "Just look," she said to Clara, "at how much good you are doing. Your mother would be so proud." The mention of her birth mother made Clara pause. Although she loved Marina as a mother, there was a growing curiosity about Julia. "Aunt Marina," she asked softly, "can you tell me more about her?" About the night of the fire? Marina hesitated, but realized it was time for the full truth. Sitting down with Clara, she began to tell her details she had kept hidden for years. How Giulia had fought desperately to save not only her daughters, but other children as well. How her last act had been one of love and sacrifice. At Bianchi & Co., Matteo received surprising news. Margaret Müller's report on the changes at the restaurant had been widely reported internationally. Invitations to speak and proposals to expand the social program began to arrive from all over the world. "It's amazing, Lena," Matteo said in amazement. "We started out just wanting a clean bathroom and now we're changing lives." Lena smiled, remembering little Clara who had appeared at the restaurant door months ago. "Sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unexpected places," she replied. As the school year drew to a close, Clara and Alice prepared for summer vacation. But it was no ordinary vacation. Eric had decided to take the family, including Marina and the other children, on a trip to Europe. "I want you to see the world," he explained. "To understand that there are no limits to what you can achieve." The day before the trip, Clara returned to Bianchi & Co. for a special visit. Sophia welcomed her with a warm hug. "My little papillon," she said excitedly. "Look at you now, ready to fly around the world." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Donna Sofia, for believing in me from the beginning." As the sun set over New Aurora, casting golden hues over the city, Clara reflected on the incredible journey she had been on. From a girl who cleaned toilets for a plate of food, she now found herself on the verge of traveling the world, with a loving family and a bright future ahead of her. But most important, she realized, was that she now had the power to help others, to make a difference. And that, more than any luxury or comfort, was the real treasure she had found. The European summer was in full swing when the Valmont family, accompanied by Marina and the other children, landed in Paris. For Clara, every moment was a discovery, every sight a confirmation that dreams really could come true. Alice, who had traveled before, found a new delight in seeing the world through her sister's awed eyes. Together they explored the halls of the Louvre, climbed the Eiffel Tower, and strolled along the banks of the Seine. "Alice," Clara said one night as they watched the city lights from the top of the Eiffel Tower, "did you ever imagine we'd be here like this together?" Alice smiled, squeezing her sister's hand. "Not in my wildest dreams, but now I can't imagine it any other way." Eric watched his daughters with a full heart. Each smile, each discovery, was a balm for the years of pain and absence. Beside him, Marina also smiled, seeing how the children she had raised were enjoying every moment. The trip continued through Italy, Greece, and Spain. At each stop, Eric made sure to not only point out the sights, but also introduce the children to local social projects, showing how people in different parts of the world were working to make a difference. In a small village in Tuscany, Clara had an idea that would change the course of their lives once again. Inspired by a local project that taught cooking to at-risk youth, she turned to her father with a twinkle in her eye. "Dad," she began, her voice shaking with excitement. "What if we did something like this in New Aurora? Not just at Bianchi & Co., but on a grand scale?" Eric listened intently as Clara detailed her vision. A culinary and hospitality school that not only taught technical skills, but also values such as empathy, teamwork, and social responsibility. "We could call it the Giulia Valmont Institute," Alice suggested, joining in. "It would be a way to honor Mom's memory and continue her legacy of helping others." The idea quickly took shape. For the rest of the trip, the family worked together on the project, each contributing their unique skills and perspectives. Marina brought her experience caring for vulnerable children, while Eric used his business contacts to secure support and resources. When they returned to Nova Aurora, the project was already in full swing. Bianchi & Co. was to be expanded, with Wangdoem, an entire wing dedicated to the new school. Matteo, upon hearing about the idea, not only supported it but offered to be one of the instructors. "It's amazing how it all started with a little girl wanting to clean bathrooms," he reflected emotionally. The months that followed were intense. As Clara and Alice prepared for another school year at St. Clair, they also became deeply involved in the creation of the Institute. Their personal experiences, so different yet so complementary, were fundamental in shaping the school's curriculum and philosophy. The opening day of the Julia Valmont Institute arrived on a sunny spring morning. The local and national press were in attendance, eager to cover the groundbreaking initiative that promised to transform lives. Clara, wearing a custom chef's uniform, was nervous but determined as she took the stage to deliver her speech. "Year ago," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "I was just a little girl dreaming of a plate of food. Today I stand here not only with my belly full, but with my heart overflowing with gratitude and purpose." She continued, sharing her story, discovering her family, and how each person present had played a crucial role in her journey. This institute is not just about teaching people how to cook or serve. It's about serving life, serving the community. It's about turning hardships into opportunities, just like they did for me. As Clara spoke, faces in the audience became emotional. Margaret Mueller, present as guest of honor, discreetly wiped away a tear. Sophia, standing next to Matteo, beamed with pride at her little butterfly, who was now spreading her wings to fly. After the speech, it was Alice's turn to take the stage. Together, the sisters cut the ribbon, officially opening the Julia Valmont Institute. The first classes began the following week. Young people from all over New Aurora, many from similar backgrounds to Clara's, filled the classrooms and training kitchens. The enthusiasm was palpable, the hope visible on every face. Eric, watching from his new office at the Institute, felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Picking up a photo of Julia from his desk, he whispered, "You would be so proud, my love, our girls, they're changing the world." That evening, there was a small celebration at Bianchi & Co. Clara, Alice, Eric, Marina, Matteo, Sophia, and everyone who had been part of that incredible journey gathered for a special dinner. As the dishes were served, each prepared by one of the Institute's new students, Clara looked around the table, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "You know," she said, raising her glass, "they say life sometimes gives us lemons. But looking at all of you, at everything that's happened, I think life has given us the perfect ingredients for the most delicious recipe." Everyone laughed and toasted, their glasses clinking in the night air. Outside, the lights of New Aurora shone brightly, like stars promising new dreams and possibilities. And so what began as a simple offer to clean toilets turned into a story of love, redemption, and hope. Clara and Alice, once separated by fate, were now united not only by blood, but by a common purpose to make the world a better place. Bianchi & Co., once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, had become a beacon of opportunity and transformation. And Nova Aurora, the city that had witnessed this entire journey, shone with a renewed light, reminding everyone that the greatest miracles often begin in the most unlikely places. As the night wore on and laughter echoed through the restaurant, Clara knew deep in her heart that this was not the end of one story, but just the beginning of many more. With her family by her side and a bright future ahead of her, she was ready for whatever adventure life might bring.